Hello and welcome to Gar Borras' Time Machine. If you can believe it, Gar, this is going to be episode 17. And people have really been enjoying our Christmas special, which was our episode on the It's a Wonderful Life movie. And I got to tell you, I'm as surprised as anybody, Gar. It is the one episode that's gotten the best rating out of everything we've done. Everybody has kind of responded to every episode, but we got like 219 views so far, something like that. And,
wow.
And I'm like, and that's kind of, it grows with each and every passing day. So people have really responded to that, and I'm pleasantly surprised.
Well, maybe, hopefully, crossing, my fingers, my eyes, and my toes, that, that people are starting to, become interested in this, I guess what we would call show.
Yeah.
It's really, it all started out as interviews, but it's really developed into kind of a show.
Yeah, because, even, when you, we're going to be doing our episode today on Happy Days, which, as I've been sharing with people, this is a show you and I have been wanting to do for a while, because this is one of our favorite classic TV shows, and this show has come up several times in some of the past shows. And I'll tell you, when we first started talking about doing this, last time when we did our Twilight Zone episode, which we're going to get ready to post for the next couple days, you said, hey, let's do an episode on Happy Days. And I really had, when we started talking about this, I had one particular idea for the show. And in doing my research, it's really turned into something else. And you'll see what I mean by the end of the episode. So let's get right into it. Why don't you share with us, how you first became exposed to Happy Days and became such a huge fan?
Well, back in the mid-'70s, I remember because I was in high school in the mid-'70s.
Yeah.
I graduated in 75, and during that time period, what we used to do is at school. I went to West Covina High School, and we would have a 50s day.
Okay, yeah.
And where it was popular for everybody to dress up like you were in the 50s, with the skirts and I forgot what the name of those shoes, but they're a very popular style of shoes. They were black and white.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe them, but it was a real popular type of shoe.
Yeah.
And everybody would go to school dressed up like they were in the 50s, and it was real popular because there was a lot of people that would show up at school dressed up that way, and it was fun. Everybody, you're a kid. When you're in high school, you don't think you're a kid, but realistically looking back now, all these years, we were kids, and it was fun. Everybody's giggling and laughing, and so it was. This is the. It was really popular back in the mid-'70s. For that, and so there's movies that came out back in that time, American Graffiti, which was also taking place in the same time period, and it was just real. See, nowadays, these same high school kids are it's popular for them to dress up like the 80s.
Hey, now let me interrupt you for a minute, Gar. Speaking of American Graffiti, do you know something American Graffiti and Happy Days have in common?
Well, Ron Howard.
Okay, yeah, and then there's also kind of another person in there that's kind of Happy Days related. Cindy Williams, of course, would go on to play Shirley and Laverne and Shirley, and they first popped up on an episode of Happy Days before they got their own show, and I think another legendary actress that kind of got her start there was that many people know from TV was Mackenzie Phillips, who of course would go on to star on the TV show, One Day at a Time. So a lot of people got their start. Of course, Ron Howard was an actor for years, and that was one of his first major kind of movie roles. But from what I understand, Happy Days happened a lot because of the American Graffiti movie.
Yes, and also American Graffiti. See, that movie was, huge box office success back in the mid-'70s. I mean, it was just, everybody was going to the theater to see that movie.
That was like iconic, kind of what everybody's idea of Americana was back then. And I'm going to give you a bit of trivia of it. I don't know if you know, but if you had to take a wild stab at it, any idea who directed American Graffiti?
Yes, from Star Wars.
George Lucas. Yes, bingo. And that's why I bring that up, because you hear the name George Lucas, a lot of people don't even think about American Graffiti, and yet that was his first kind of major.
You always think of him
Star Wars.
Space,
yeah. Yeah.
But American Graffiti is so opposite of that. But also, American Graffiti also launched Suzanne Summers.
Oh yeah. See, I forgot about that. But
she had a non-speaking role as there was a main character in the movie, and he had a thing, just by glancing at her, I guess you would call love at first sight. He was just, enthralled with the beauty of that girl that was sitting in that car. And so whenever you saw her, it was just that girl sitting in that car. She didn't say anything. She was just hot.
Yeah. And of course it depends on, what area you grew up in, but like you said, for many people, that was kind of their first exposure to like somebody like Suzanne Summers. And it's amazing all these years later, and it's not a bad thing, but all these years later when people think of Suzanne Summers, I think it's safe to say that more people remember her as Chrissy from Three's Company than they do from American Graffiti, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah. But, American Graffiti just kind of launched her career.
Oh, yeah,
because I think that was the first thing she was really in. At least it was the first thing that she was in that was of major significance.
Oh, yeah. And now here, Gar, this is kind of simple, and I think you're going to know this, but I'm going to give you a little trivia here. Okay, so and we kind of covered this already, but in what 2 decades does Happy Days cover, or take place in?
Oh, the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah, and what I was reading about that, the reason that is important is the guy that created the show, Gary Marshall, he kind of grew up in the 50s, and that was kind of his era. And Happy Days was kind of, obviously, his creation, his kind of looking back on his adolescence and what it was like in the 50s and stuff. And people, they say that was popular with people at the time because, like, as guys like you and me are growing up, in the 70s and the 80s, you even in the 60s, we're kind of looking at this show, and we're seeing kind of, this is supposed to be when our parents were growing up and stuff, and kind of getting a glimpse of what the world was, really like
during our parents' time.
Yeah, and then here's another one. You and I were kind of discussing when we first talked about doing this show. In season 1, how many kids do you remember did the Cunninghams have?
Oh, God. I think it was 3, right?
Yeah, okay. Now, this is the thing. It was Chuck, Joni, and Richie, obviously. And Richie's the middle child who the show was originally centered around, and Happy Days was supposed to center around.
Nobody knows who Chuck is.
Yeah. And Richie's supposed to kind of be the innocent kind of, straight shooter, never gets in trouble, but the show's supposed to be about him and his friends and all the trouble they get into and all that, and what growing up in the 50s is like. And Chuck is kind of, I don't really know why he's there, but they never really developed the character, and we're going to get into why later. But what's interesting is I heard Tom Bosley, I was watching an interview online that Tom Bosley did a number of years ago, and he was saying the character of Chuck, he goes, he was supposed to be, in college age. He was he stayed at home at the time. He was a basketball star at the school, and most of the scenes he's just dribbling the basketball. He said there's one scene he said where Chuck is talking to Mr. C, and he's just dribbling the ball. There's not one word between them, but he's like, I was able to understand what he said. So again, and then Chuck, they never really developed the character, and then eventually he just kind of never seen again, disappears
into the sunset.
And people for years, what happened to Chuck? And see, that's the thing. Now, if you were to do something like that, you would explain, Chuck got married or he moved away or something. And what's funny is, even by the last episode, there's never a mention of Chuck again. It's even at the final episode where Joni and Chachi are getting married, everybody's in the backyard. Mr. C says something about the fact that they have 2 kids. So, again, if there was something like that was done today, they would kind of explain, oh, Chuck, was away. But that's kind of interesting. And Happy Days, of course, what we're talking about, is an American television comedy that originally aired on ABC television from January 15th, 1974 to July 19th, 1984. So for almost like 10 years. And at that time, that was one of the longest running TV shows. You didn't have TV shows that ran for 10 years,
Yeah, but you can also see how that time period, the mid-70s, how it's ripe for a TV show like that.
Yeah, now of course,
all this, the success of all this other stuff that was going on, you got kids going to school celebrating, 50s Day. You got American Graffiti's popularity. It just, you kind of get the feel, about what we're talking about, how that time period, the mid-70s, was ripe. For a TV show like that.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, Gar. I don't want to assume anything here. I know as far as my favorite character, what it was, but when you first started watching the show, because if you first started watching, let's say in the first season, from the very beginning, you could see how the show developed over a course of time. But like I said, originally it was based around Richie and his friends. When you first started watching the show, which was the character that you kind of was your favorite right away, or you focused on immediately?
Well, just like anybody else, I think it was the Fonz.
Yeah. And here's the funny thing. If you've seen some of the stuff I was posting about doing the show today, like we've talked so many times before, how the TV suits got it so wrong. I mean, when Gary Marshall first created the character of the Fonz, the suits at the networks were so worried about having a character like, oh my God, they're going to think he's a criminal. They're going to think he's a hoodlum.
Yeah, you're right, because, at that time, socially, society used to look very down on people that came from the wrong side of the tracks.
Yeah.
And actually that saying, the wrong side of the tracks, comes from that time period.
Yeah. And with,
it's really, it was a very taboo, to be somebody from the wrong side of the tracks. Society shunned you. And so the network executives were very against having a character like that, because all they could do is think of the negative connotations that were floating around back in that time period.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was here's another thing. In the first season, even though the Fonz was a minor character, the network's executives would not allow Fonzie to wear the black leather jacket.
Yeah.
In the first season, he wore a windbreaker.
Yeah, you and I picked up right on that, because that's kind of was the next point I was getting ready to make. And here's the whole thing. Like, I was going to originally talk about how great what a great series it was, which it is, but the thing is, in all my research, it's kind of like how the audience kind of really made their feelings known about how much they really loved the character Fonzie. So much that they had no choice but to kind of turn the Fonz from a minor character into a major character. In fact, at one point, originally when they started the show, Ron Howard, who had been known for years on TV from the Andy Griffith Show, he was signed as a main star on that show. And then once Fonzie's popularity kind of rose, at one point they called him into the office and they said, we're thinking of, because Fonzie's becoming so popular, we're thinking of changing the name of the show from Happy Days to Fonzie's Happy Days. And then Ron Howard, I seen an interview. We're going to post some of the stuff on the page when we post this, but where he says, I had nothing against Henry Winkler's kind of, growing popularity because he was great at what he did. He deserved it. He says, I thought that was wrong to kind of change the whole premise of a show to kind of, Fonzie's Happy Days. And I told them at the time that if they were going to do that, that I no longer wanted to be any part of a show. They said, okay, well, we will just stick with Happy Days. And I do think that's kind of a route they should have taken. But I will say, it's funny that the minute Fonzie's popularity started to rise, Gary Marshall was the one that said, you know what, maybe we need to kind of change the look with a black leather jacket. And what they were so afraid of, all of a sudden the Fonz, he did look more threatening. He did look, everybody, there was no doubt he was cool, if you know what I mean. And, I mean, like in a windbreaker jacket, the Fonz can't really be that threatening, but once he put on that leather jacket in all the episodes from that point on, it was so funny because Fonz was a loyal guy. He would always defend his friends, but I would be watching these episodes laughing sometimes where Fonzie would like back up Richie when somebody's picking on him or something, and it would be like 3 against the Fonz, and it's like no question the Fonz is going to win, and the other guy is going to back down. It's just the development of the Fonzie character is what really kind of, I think, is what needs to be taken notice of that show.
Yeah, it didn't start out as much for him, but it made him into a major star back in the 70s. I mean, he couldn't go anywhere without being recognized.
Oh yeah, in fact, a clip I was watching of Henry Winkler talking about kind of his fame and all that went along with it. He said, when Fonz became really popular, like in the 70s, he said like they would go out and do these publicity things where they go and like have fan meet and greets and stuff. And he said at one point he had so many people like following him like in a mall that he had to like climb like a waterfall or something and to get away. And he said at one point he says like I really appreciated the everybody's love for me, but at one point like I was in a mall and these people are chasing me, but I had to kind of get into character. And I got into the voice of the Fonz, and then people kind of started listening, and they backed up. And he said, it's just amazing. And then he said, even on the day of the tapings, he would get there earlier than everybody else, and he'd get into, like, they do these live TV tapings, and then they go out and entertain the people before they'd actually do a taping, say hi and everything. And before he'd get out there in front of the cameras, he'd like, start practicing the Fonzie voice and get into character. And he said, like, I'd have to be in that mode for the rest of the day,
Well, it's trippy because, we only know him as him portraying the Fonz because that's really that's his most famous character. Everything he's done since that hasn't even come close to the Fonz. So, we think of him talking like that all the time. I picture him being at home making breakfast and talking to his kids like the Fonz.
Yeah, and the popularity of the Fonz too. I mean, I was reading once that happened, Fonzie to this day remains one of the most iconic like merchandised TV characters of all time. And again, another cash flow, I guess, for the suits that didn't see what they had, right in front of them. And the minute something becomes that popular, everybody wants to kind of have a hand in it.
Cash in.
Yeah. And Happy Days was not an immediate hit, Gar, like a lot of these shows we've talked about.
No.
It started out with.
Isn't that crazy how so many of these that we do this on, originally started out as not all that super successful, but eventually became hugely successful.
Yeah, and to go along with that, it said, it started out, with mixed reviews from the critics, as always, but became very popular and successful over time with the audience. Again, once again, and talking a little bit more about the popularity of, the Fonzie character. I was listening to some of these clips that I'll be posting when we do this, but it was talking about the reason Chuck was kind of phased out is the more they developed the Fonzie character, and there was more of an immediate bond between, Fonzie Fonzie, and Richie. And they said, okay, because Henry Winkler in real life was actually like 4 or 5 years older than Ron Howard. And so they said Fonzie was more kind of the older brother type that Richie needed. Richie was running to Fonzie for all the advice and everything and help, not Chuck. And they said, so that's why Chuck was kind of phased out, because they seen the chemistry that the two characters there had. And they said that's also why, because in order to make Fonzie a major character, why they moved in, into the apartment above the Cunninghams, because then he's going to be there every day with the family, and he's going to be interacting. And so that's why that was done as well.
Yes. It's funny how you have a show like that, which is a time period piece,
mm-hmm.
and it just for some reason. Time period pieces were real popular back in the 1970s. There was a lot of, movies and a lot of... the 70s was also the beginning of the miniseries.
Yeah.
And a lot of those miniseries were timepieces. So during the 1970s, that was also a very popular decade for a lot of time period pieces.
Oh, yeah. And talk about time period pieces, so much so that... that's why when you do a show like that, I mean, like I remember tuning in every Tuesday night, at 8 p.m. I mean, Tuesday night was my TV night. It was at one point it was Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Three's Company, Taxi. That was my Tuesday night. And it always kicked off with Happy Days and the Fonz. And here's the thing. When you do a show like that, it's very important that the sets, the furniture in the house, but it looks like it's from the 50s, because could you imagine having modern furniture in there that was from the 90s or the 2000s or whatever, or even the decade before, you're like, that doesn't look like it was from the 50s. That's like, I got a couch like that on my... So it's very important that they... And the people that, filmed that show, they were very great at having sets, and even the clothing that people look like, that's clothing they would wear in the 50s. So that was very important. And of course, as I said, the show was originally kind of centered around Richie Cunningham and his friends. And Richie Cunningham, let's talk about who he was. Okay, Richie Cunningham was thought to be smart, innocent, humdrum, a nerd, a dork, someone who always did the right thing, someone who was always dependable and grounded. In fact, so much to the point that a lot of Richie's dilemmas were because, people thought he's boring. He does the right thing. The times he'd get in trouble was when he tried to be something that he wasn't, or something. But just like Richie Cunningham, that's what we think of him, or at least that's what I thought of him.
Well, so that's the reason why. It was so much easier to, latch on to the Fonz.
Yeah.
Because he was like the opposite of that.
In fact, I seen an interview with Henry Winkler. This is all stuff I was able to find online, and he was talking about being based in the show being based in the 50s. He said, when you hear a show's based on the 50s, or you see a movie that's supposed to take place in the 50s, we all got our kind of idea of what that means. He goes, when I first heard Happy Days was going to be based in the 50s, I told myself, well, I'm not going to wear I'm not going to have a greaser look, or I'm not going to comb my hair or anything. I'm not going to do that. He said, that's the first thing they wanted me to do. And if you remember at the beginning of the opening credits where Fonzie kind of goes in the bathroom and he looks in the mirror and snaps his finger, and he looks so perfect he doesn't have to comb, not a hair out of place. Now Henry Winkler said that is something he did all on his own. He said, because I kind of told myself that if I had a character like that, I was going to do a little different, but I wasn't going to comb my hair in every scene. He goes, so I stayed pretty true to that, but at that time, I'm a new actor, I'm kind of on the rise. I haven't reached a point in my career where I can kind of tell them what I want to do. And he said, I even had somebody on the crew tell me, no, look, you kind of got to do what's written in the script. But he said, the minute I snapped my fingers in that, the way the audience reacted, everybody reacted, it worked. So stuff like that, he said he was able to ad-lib along the way, and it stuck. And that's another reason the character of Fonzie really worked, because it was so authentic. He kind of helped create, that character.
Well, it's funny because, my childhood was, mostly back in the 60s, and back in those days, at home we had black and white TV.
Yeah.
And usually, if you had problems with your TV, there was two terms that they would use for problems with the TV. One was the picture keeps flipping.
Yeah.
And then you have to kind of adjust the channel changing knob. There was a thing in the middle of the channel. I
remember, yeah.
Yes, and then you could adjust that and get the picture to actually just stay that picture on the picture tube. And then the other term that was used is snow.
Oh yeah.
When the picture would just go to complete, I guess you would call it snow.
Oh yeah, and Gar, do you remember TVs back in the day too? You'd have one to change the UHF channels, one a little round thing to change the channels.
And there was nothing on UHF back in those days.
The only thing you'd get is 28, like with the Electric Company and Sesame Street. But to further go along with what we're talking about here with Happy Days, Happy Days was also one of the very first shows to kind of develop a language all its own. And you're going to see what I'm talking about here. Things such as, sit on it, bucko.
Yes.
Cool, uncool, nerd, ay. The Fonz. These were words, phrases people started to repeat. And so much to this day, when you hear any of these words, they're immediately associated with Happy Days.
Yes. And for me, whenever what I was alluding to earlier about, if you had problems with your TV,
yeah,
a lot of times you could alleviate the problem with your TV by hitting the TV on the side.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's kind of where the Fonz, got that whole thing where, nobody could fix the jukebox, then they'd call the Fonz, and the Fonz would do kind of like warm up his hands, and then all of a sudden give it a little tap on the side, and then all of a sudden the jukebox would start working again.
Yeah, there was nothing the Fonz could not do.
And whenever, there was so many times when I was young, that there were a gazillion times that, we'd have problems with the TV, and I'd hit the TV on the side, and the TV would start working again.
Yeah, there's nothing the Fonz
so it's kind of unique to that time period where, people were doing it back then. So when Fonzie was doing it, socially people could relate to it because they were doing it with their TV at home too.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? There was a tie-in. It was more than just him having the ability to fix things by tapping it with his fist. It was something that tied into what people were doing at home and experiencing at home every day.
Yeah, Fonzie at one point became almost like a religion. Even the Fonz believed in all that stuff, in all those powers or abilities to do stuff like that, and so much so that I remember an episode even where all of a sudden, for whatever reason, Fonzie came up with an allergy. He was allergic to something. They didn't know what, but it seemed like every time a girl would kiss him, he would sneeze or something, and then the Fonz in this episode gets this crazy idea. Oh my God, I'm allergic to girls, and I can't kiss a girl. And then he got believing it so much to the point where he's like, oh my God, I can't go outside. I can't kiss a girl. Oh my God, Mrs. C, Fonz has lost his cool.
Fonz has lost his cool.
Yeah, it was so it was so unbelievable. But again, just to talk about this as we're sitting here talking about this, and I'm thinking back to just how iconic the Fonz really was back in the 70s. At one point, like with a lot of these things, there was even a Fonzie Doll. Do you remember that?
Well, I don't remember going to the store and seeing Fonzie dolls.
Yeah.
I think, back in the 60s was the very, very beginning of when they introduced G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
And G.I. Joe were dolls that were basically, similar in size to Barbies and that kind of thing. And so, when I was a kid, and I would go to the toy section, which is what every kid would do when their parents went to the store.
Yeah.
I was always beelining right straight over to the G.I. Joes.
Yeah, and this Happy Day show is once again, it's proof that the audience always knows a little something more than the suits. I mean, so much, and I'm glad that this is one time where they actually listen to the audience, because I was also in my research reading that the ratings were kind of starting to fall after the first season, and then Gary Marshall and the people at the TV network, they decided we've got to kind of rebrand the show, and people like the Fonzie character, so we're going to kind of center the show around that, like we said. And because they did that, Gar, from 1976 to 1977, Happy Days was the #1 television show, for a solid year. So that's really saying, something, and great for listening to the the audience.
Well, my interpretation of that is leave the creative decisions to the creative people.
Yeah.
Because whenever you have the people behind the desk trying to make creative decisions, it usually doesn't go very well.
Yeah, and
for some reason, people, you have to have a special kind of a vision in your mind, to be able to make those kind of creative decisions. And Gary Marshall, obviously, he made a lot of good decisions, because if you look at his resume, I mean, it's just stunning how many shows that he was behind that became huge successes during that time.
And a lot of those shows were spin-offs from this show, which originated on Happy Days. Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, and also talking about Laverne and Shirley. Obviously, one of the main stars of that show was his sister, Penny Marshall, which would also go on to become a huge director in her own right. They both now since passed on, but before anybody ever knew Penny Marshall as Laverne, she was on one of his other shows that predated Happy Days, which was, of course, the television version of Odd Couple. Yeah, so
yes, and he's behind the television version of the Odd Couple, and the Odd Couple is the predecessor to Two and a Half Men.
Yeah.
2.5 Men is almost a cookie cutter of the same premise that was going on, in the Odd Couple. So, and another thing that a lot of people don't know about Gary Marshall, because he's kind of like,
everywhere. Yeah.
Well, he's everywhere, and people still know who he is, but they don't really know all that much about him.
Yeah.
He started as a writer for I Love Lucy.
Yes, I've heard that. And
so so that's a quite a successful start to a career, being a writer for the I Love Lucy show,
to creating your own
huge another icon. He was involved in so many iconic TV shows. Dick Van Dyke Show.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
A lot of people don't know that, but back in the 1960s, and that was a hugely popular show.
Yeah, these are all,
and when you watch the these channels nowadays, that the whole thing behind the channel is all retro shows.
Yeah, but
a lot of those shows that you see, on those channels are Gary Marshall shows.
I spend my weekends like watching things I've taped throughout the week on those channels, but it's amazing. All these years later, they're still entertaining. No matter how many times I laugh just as hard as the first. But The Odd Couple is a great example of that. I think that I Love Lucy and so many of these other ones really are going to deserve one of our episodes. Dedicating an hour to it, because just all great shows. Like even I Love Lucy, as we sit here talking about, that's when I was in doing research on Happy Days, came across the fact that that's one of a couple shows I think we will be doing an episode on that. Like,
it wouldn't make sense not to. There was a time in my life that I had watched virtually every single episode of I Love Lucy.
Yeah, and I bet you could quote the lines as they're about ready to be said. Like I could do with many of the Happy Days or Three's Company episodes. And I Love Lucy. I mean, another reason I want to do an episode on just I Love Lucy is because that show this year is, if you can believe it, is going to turn 70 years old. What does that say about a show that's kind of been on the air nonstop for the last 70 years?
And still selling well.
Yeah,
when you go into these places that have things that you can buy where, like you can buy Elvis dishes or this, you know what I mean? Three Stooges and all that kind of stuff. I Love Lucy is still a top seller of retro, stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of store you would call that, but, I've seen stores like that at Disney Walk and stuff like that. You go in there and there's all kinds of stuff. And first thing you're going to see is a whole section dedicated to I Love Lucy.
I would call it retro or, memorabilia or stuff like that, but...
memorabilia shops and retro, but, I Love Lucy is still a top seller. But just like you'll see I Love Lucy, you'll also see Happy Days in those places. You'll see, these other TV shows that are part of Gary Marshall's, resume. He was such a box office gold
visionary
type of person, that was so behind so many hugely successful shows. His star is fading, but his career still lives on.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, as far as his stars fading, he passed away a few years back, but yeah, like you said, everybody's still watching these shows all these years later. So he's really put his footprint and his stamp on all over the history of pop culture and stuff. So that's about all I have to say in regards to that. But talking about how this show had a lingo all its own, like eventually they would go on to create the character of Chachi Arcola, which was of course Fonzie's younger cousin, who again, Fonzie's kind of like an older brotherly type, because Chachi's just he's with his mother, his father's died, he's got really nobody else but the Fonz to kind of look up to. And so when they're creating the Chachi character, like, okay, Fonzie's cool, so his cousin's got to be kind of cool like him, so, and they got Scott Baio, and they look like they could be related. They acted the same. But talking about lingo and catchphrases, do you remember what Chachi's catchphrase was? I forgot until I read this again doing the research, but you're gonna know right away when I say it. Wah wah wah.
Wah wah wah.
And that became and that became a thing because they kind of put him with the character Joni.
I just imagine somebody younger listening to that go, what?
Yeah, but it became a thing. It became a catchphrase. And that's what I love about the show. Even I seen Ron Howard on an online interview I was watching the other day, prepping for this, and he's talking about, how he kind of ad-libbed. He goes, we're doing an episode. He goes, I forget what the episode was, he says, but I just start singing, I found my thrill. And he said, and then from that point on, in probably about each episode, Richie would start singing the song, and that song, Blueberry Hill, started being associated with Richie Cunningham, and he says that became a catchphrase. But again, one of those things that kind of, he said innocently happened because he says there were other kind of catchphrases they had that people sat down and tried to come up with, but they were never as good as the stuff that the actors would kind of ad-lib on their own and come up with.
Yeah, well, and the spin-offs.
Yeah.
The Laverne and Shirley spin-off, and a lot of people don't know that Robin Williams, his career started as a minor character that the audience fell in love with. Mork from the planet Ork.
Yeah.
That launched the show Mork and Mindy, which was another hugely popular show during that time period. But nobody knew who Robin Williams was until he came up with that character, Mork from Ork, that started on Happy Days. But then you got Laverne and Shirley, where, to me, I just gravitated towards Lenny and Squiggy.
Yeah, and
they were hilarious characters on the show. They really, you take those two out of Laverne and Shirley, and you still got a show, but it's just not as good.
Yeah, and what's funny is they were kind of these two lovable idiots, but like you're right. I mean, they had this thing like stupid, and you just couldn't help but like these guys. And they eventually were like practically in every scene. They became very much like with Fonz, like major characters. I heard at one point they made a pilot for them to do their own show where Lenny and Squiggy were supposed to go off into the army. They're going to do these half-hour episodes, but then they're like, okay, how are we going to explain taking them out of Laverne and Shirley? They're all of a sudden not going to be there. So they decided kind of against that, So I don't know, but again, kind of something that happened by accident. Now, being that you and me are also kind of into music, I always love looking at like anything music related and talk about the theme song here. We did our episode on some of our favorite TV theme songs, and this is interesting because the theme song was originally "Rock Around the Clock" performed by Bill Haley and the Comets, and that was the song that opened up the show from 1974 to 1975. And again, at the time, you're not really paying too much attention, at least I wasn't, Gar, but when you think Happy Days, that's kind of the opening song I think of. And then all of a sudden after, for whatever reason, it didn't say after season 2, they changed it to the Happy Days song, and that ran like from his opening theme from 1975 to 1983, was performed by the Ron Hicklin Singers. I'm not too sure who that was, but I was doing a little research, come to find out that they did a lot of TV kind of like theme music during the 70s and 80s. So that's kind of interesting. You learn these little things, but like a lot of times when I watch the reruns, I'm not really paying attention. But if you pay attention, oh yeah, okay, it's a different song.
Well, to me, Rock Around the Clock, they could have just stayed with Rock Around the Clock.
Yeah,
but I'm sure they changed it because of, copyrights.
Yeah.
Because, Rock Around the Clock, you have, copyrights that you have to pay out and all that kind of stuff to Bill Haley and the Comets, or you see what I'm saying? And I'm just kind of spitballing on this.
Yeah.
But I feel that like when they did the Happy Days one, just to, allow them not to have that additional expense of paying out copyright royalties for Rock Around the Clock. That's my guess.
Yeah.
But then again, it's just a guess.
Yeah, and here's another interesting fact about Rock Around the Clock. It's let's see. Rock Around the Clock was ranked at number 159 on the list of Rolling Stone's list of 500 greatest songs of all time. And it was a hit on the Billboard chart again 19 years later after it originally charted, in 1974. So 1974, because it was on Happy Days, it hit the Billboard chart again at number 39 19 years later after the song was originally released.
Well, honestly, Happy Days, was a really, really good good version, for the show. I mean, I love both of them.
Yeah,
I don't have, you know what I mean? It's just like, give me either one. They're both great.
Yeah, and here's another thing too about the success of the show. I love reading stuff like this. It said after the show became successful, Gary Marshall was asked if there was anything Happy Days could do to help convince kids to read more. Now, you remember back in the 70s, I remember seeing TV commercials, like this campaign they had to kind of really encourage kids to read. But anyway, they said, and so to do so, Gary Marshall decided then to create an episode where the Fonz would go to the library to check out a book, in spite of his reputation. Fonz is supposed to be cool and like cool people don't read in that. But in this particular episode, the Fonz says, everybody is allowed to read because reading is cool. And because of this, kids thought the Fonz was cool. And that week, library card registrations went up 500%. Just think about that. Because the Fonz.
Well, it's funny, how the popularity of a fictional character can have a social impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really. This is a fictional character.
Yeah.
That it influenced people to the point where library card registrations jump like 500%.
Yeah, and
that's think about that.
Yeah, that's why
that's a fictional character having a social impact.
Yeah, that's why I felt the need to include that. I'm like, what an interesting thing. And like a lot of these classic TV shows, I have like many DVD collections of Happy Days, and I found this episode we're talking about last night, and kind of prepping for a show day. I thought, I'm going to watch this, and it was kind of interesting show. But yeah, Fonzie's in the library, and then Ralph and Potsy. Oh my God, what's the Fonz doing here? He's in the library. Fonz, what are you doing here? And he's like, the Fonz can read. It's like, yeah.
I vaguely remember.
It's the episode. It's the episode where Richie meets his girlfriend Lori Beth. They're in the library. In fact, that's why he's taken Richie to the library, because the library is a cool place to meet chicks, And then
there's something cool in it.
Yeah, so that's the way they went about, handling that. And then also another fun fact I came across. It says, that a call came into the Paramount Studios office, and some kid was talking about that he was contemplating suicide, and he really wanted to talk to the Fonz. And Henry Winkler kind of heard about this, and he went to the point of calling the kid, giving him a pep talk, say, really, life is good. Give life a second chance. And because the Fonz took the time, or Henry Winkler in particular, to talk to this kid and even take time out of his busy schedule to even take the time to, get the kid's number and call him back. That seems like a little thing, but he saved somebody's life because he took the time.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Another thing that back in those days, they portray the Fonz riding a motorcycle.
Oh, yeah. This is another good thing. I know where you're going with this.
The motorcycle, when you look at the motorcycle, it's like, I think it's an old Harley Davidson.
That's what it said, yeah.
Triumph motorcycle, which is like really cool. I mean, I would like crap my pants to have, one of those old motorcycles, like an original like that.
Yeah.
When you look at it, by today's standards, that thing is a toy.
Yeah, okay. And so much, it's funny that you picked up on that, because it was saying how, although Fonzie loved motorcycles, Henry Winkler, who played Fonzie, was terrified of motorcycles. Most of the scenes where Fonzie rides a motorcycle, the motorcycle was attached to a platform and pulled by a truck.
Well, I used to ride motorcycles, when I was younger and everything like that. And, all you got to do is take one drop and, you're in, you could be in some serious trouble.
Yeah, yeah.
So I understand, his being terrified. All it takes is one spill. But it's just kind of funny when you look back, the motorcycle is such a cool motorcycle and everything, but it's so small compared to, you put that motorcycle right next to a Harley Hog, and it would look like a toy. Yeah,
and what's funny about the character Fonzie, I heard in another online interview, which I'll post eventually when we post this, where he's talking about Fonzie is like the complete opposite of Henry Winkler. He's like, Fonzie's confident, Fonzie's cocky, Fonzie's cool. He goes, like he just recently came out, for example, Henry Winkler a couple years back, that he was dyslexic. And so even if you think about, the guy's rise in popularity, he had trouble reading his scripts, had to have people help him with that. Until he kind of learned how to, get help with that. But the point being, he's like, the Fonz is somebody really confident. He goes, I wasn't that confident, but he goes, I'd really get into the role of the Fonz. I'd get into character. And he says, Fonzie, that's what's interesting about the character. He said, Fonzie was everything I wasn't.
Yes. And then when Happy Days wound up taking its course and then wound up ending, he really kind of had a hard time finding roles after that, because he was another one of those victims of what they used to call typecast.
But he
once you get established as this character, and that character becomes so huge, it's hard for you to be seen as other characters and doing other things and stuff. And so he went through a long time where he wasn't really getting a whole lot of work. But he did do a movie. Back in the 80s.
Night Shift.
Night Shift. Oh my gosh, that is such a funny movie. It's a really, really hilarious movie. It's the first movie, it launched, what's that guy's name that did Beetlejuice?
Michael Keaton?
The guy that played Beetlejuice.
Michael Keaton.
Yes, Michael Keaton. Night Shift launched Michael Keaton, and guess who directed Night Shift?
Ron Howard.
Yes.
Yeah, and here's an interesting thing about what you're talking about Henry Winkler being typecast. That's why immediately following the show, one of the first things he went into doing was directing and producing TV shows and stuff. One of the first things he directed and produced was the MacGyver TV show. And I was hearing him talk too in an interview about being typecast. He said that's why I took many years off from acting. I got into directing and producing, and he said what really relaunched his acting career, and he's kind of been going nonstop ever since, is when Adam Sandler asked him to be in the Waterboy movie.
A lot of people didn't like Waterboy.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Yeah. And he said because of that, people all of a sudden want him to be in movies and make TV appearances, and he's been kind of going nonstop ever since then. And I've heard him talking in interviews where he says, "Yeah, I love directing and producing." He goes, "But I'd much rather be in front of the camera." He goes, "Allows me to kind of get creative and stuff." Now, Gar, you'll be interested in knowing this. Now we've been talking a lot about Henry Winkler and kind of the popularity of the Fonzie character. That's what I meant today when I said this show has turned into something more than what I thought it was originally going to be. But again, that's another example of the audience kind of, making their feelings known. But do you know who they considered for the role of Fonzie before Henry Winkler?
No.
This is gonna shock the hell out of you. Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees was
oh my gosh.
Now he originally auditioned for the role of Fonzie. But he was very tall, and at 6 feet tall, he was taller than the rest of the cast, Happy Days cast, and Gary Marshall felt that the Fonz should be eye level with all of his peers. Now, you do not realize the importance of something like that, but it kind of snapped when I was reading that last night, because if you notice, like when all the scenes where Fonzie's getting ready to fight or something like that, or challenge somebody, he's eye level with them, and like there's a whole thing about the Fonz that other people fear him. There's no question that he could kick somebody's butt, if you know what I mean. And he's always looking like eye to eye. And yet at the same time, he said that there's not one scene where Fonzie ever hits anybody or hurts, kind of like Batman, or hurts anybody. That was very important to the people at the network and Henry Winkler, who played the character. He's like, I didn't want Fonzie to be seen as a hood. I didn't want Fonzie to be seen as somebody that ever hurt anybody. And he says we were very kind of careful with that. And again, by the end of the show, Fonzie, who the TV networks once feared was going to be looked down on as a hood and a criminal type, by the end of the show, the guy is he's a teacher. He owns part of Arnold's, and and he owns his own auto mechanic garage.
Well, they were trying to show, that people grow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what people do. I'm very different from what I was like, way back in the mid-'70s. And, and I'd like to think that I grew, even though not taller.
Yeah. And,
I grew as a person. Yeah. But, they're basically portraying him as a person that grew also, and they used the bad boy character to send messages to the public, because I think people are much more willing to accept suggestions from someone that has flaws.
Yeah, and it's also too kind of like the old saying goes, it's all in the messenger. As they say, you get more sugar with honey or something like that. It's kind of a way you talk to people. Like if you talk to somebody, like even you take what's going on with this COVID stuff and people getting on TV and telling people, if you don't get vaccinated, you're a killer, you're murdering people. That's not really the message you want to send, It's all about how you kind of go about talking to people, at least in my mind. And again, to kind of end with how iconic Fonzie was, I was reading, now this is kind of, I got to put this on my bucket list, because being such a Happy Days fan, I was never even aware of this. On August 19th, 2008, a bronze statue of Fonzie was placed at the Milwaukee riverbed, and I'm assuming that had a lot to do with the fact that Happy Days is based in Milwaukee,
Wisconsin.
Yeah, but what a cool thing, that somebody thought Fonzie was such a cool character that he deserved a bronze statue to be placed somewhere. No other character on Happy Days has received such an honor. So again, I think that's just an example of the public speaking. About who the public embraced the most.
Yeah, and the producers, of course, because of Ron Howard's success as an actor from all the way back to the Andy Griffith show. They thought they were putting it more on Ron Howard having the star power, and realistically, if they didn't have Ron Howard when they were launching it, I don't think
it would have worked.
I think it would have hampered the success of the show. So it was really it's the popularity of the show was carried by both of them.
Oh yeah.
By both Ron Howard's character and the Fonz.
And that's why it was very important to have like Fonzie move in with the Cunningham family, right above them, because then that creates a whole backstory. Well, okay, where does this guy come from? What's his story? We eventually learned that at a very young age, his mother and father walked out on him, raised by his grandma Newsbound. And then Howard and Marion Cunningham, they become kind of like his family. They take him in. They I mean, I remember one of the first early episodes, a Christmas episode, where Fonzie's got nobody, and but he makes up his story, but he's going to go visit his supposed family members, in another town, and then Richie finds out somehow that Fonzie's eating like a can of beans or something at his garage, and then they're like, oh, let's invite the Fonz or something, and he comes eventually, but he doesn't want anybody to know, but he doesn't really have anywhere to go, and he's kind of ashamed of that, and then the father, Mr. C's like, oh, well, I guess you missed your bus. You have to stay here now. And he's like, hey, Mr. C, I dig what you just did. Thanks, And so he became one of their family, and that's kind of why they were kind of forced to do that, I think, move him in above the family. But there was also an episode eventually where they decide that the Cunninghams are going to sell their house. They don't end up selling the house, but he's like, oh wow, you're moving. And they go, well, you weren't going to stay here forever, were you, Fonzie? Well, why not? And then that was their bright idea to kind of get the show to kind of advance. But I think once they started doing like that, the show's ratings kind of went down.
Well, I was just thinking that the catchphrase thing was ran strong with that show.
Oh yeah.
But I'd say that another catchphrase that just incidentally became really popular, and people do it all the time without even thinking about it. That they're repeating something from the. When you refer to him as Mr. C and the mom as Mrs. C.
Oh yeah, and what's enduring about that is. Okay, Marion Ross, she's getting up there. She's like 90 something now. We just lost Betty White, but Tom Bosley, who played Mr. C, he's been dead probably about 10, 15 years, and I seen an old interview clip with him talking about that how he wanted to be remembered, and he said that his wife told him at the time something to the effect that that when Mr. when he died, that Tom Bosley, who was Mr. B, would always be remembered as Mr. C. Yeah,
that Tom Bosley was actually the second choice for the Mr. C character.
I didn't know that.
They had somebody else totally in mind, to play Mr. C, but that person was involved. Had made a commitment when they were putting together Happy Days.
Yeah.
That the other actor had made a commitment to doing some play or something like that.
Yeah.
And then when they said, okay, we're ready for you to start filming Happy Days, he declined because he wanted to fulfill his commitment to that play, and then they wound up giving it to Tom Bosley.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things that just like I can't see anybody else playing the Fonz, I can't envision anybody else as Mr. or Mrs. C, Yes.
I mean, he was a second choice, but I can't, to this day, I could never imagine anybody else playing Mr. C other than Tom Bosley.
Yeah, you just, wow, it amazes me, and before we wrap this up, just a few other things I think we need to really include here that I stumbled upon last night, like, as I always do, like, thinking there's just something a little bit missing that we need to kind of get that extra little thing. And I came across this interview with Pat Morita. He, of course, played Arnold, the owner of Arnold's. A lot
of people don't. Pat Morita was Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid.
Yeah, and that was years later after Happy Days and everything. He kind of his career got a second life because of that. But before,
going back to what you were saying, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, but before Happy Days, people knew him from, of course, appearing on Sanford and Son and some other TV shows in the 70s, but Sanford and Son was what he was known for before. And apparently, in this interview I was looking at, he talks about being a real good friend, him and Red Fox, and it was actually Red Fox that got him on Sanford Son, of course, originally. And anyways, but he was talking about how he got the role of Arnold, and he said originally, he says they're asking him questions about, is he Chinese or Japanese, and they come to discover, okay, whoever it was behind the scenes, they decide Arnold's supposed to be Chinese, and they've already hired him to play the part, and they discover Pat Morita is Japanese. Oh my God. And somebody oh my God, we can't have you play the role of Arnold. He's like, why not? I've already been hired to do the part. And they had something called Hollywood Standard and Practices, and he says, which basically was this. He says they've hired a Japanese guy to play what's supposed to be a Chinese character, and the rules at the time are this, that we can't have that. If this is supposed to be a Chinese character, we have to have a Chinese person playing the Chinese character, and then so he kind of got the job anyways, because he came up with this backstory. And they had him come up with an accent for the character, and he's like, he came up with the Japanese accent. He's like, they go, why does Arnold talk that way then? And he's like, because his mother met his father in the war, and it was after the Japanese war and all this, and they're like, okay, we'll buy that, okay. And so he was allowed to continue on with the part. But can you imagine such a practice?
Over a stupid little technicality.
Yeah. And just think of, if that had been allowed to take place, his career might never have taken off, and what a shame that would have been.
Well, everything turned out
the way it should.
Perfectly in the end, and when they ended the show, Happy Days, they ended it with Fonzie like on water skis jumping over a shark.
Yeah.
And that scene wound up, coining the phrase
jumping the shark.
When something has taken its course and reached its end, you're jumping the shark.
Yeah. I read that. That was actually a few years before the show actually came to an end, but I know what you mean. Yeah, they coined that. People started coining that phrase, and here's just a couple other things, Gar. I don't know if you noticed on our Gar Borras' Time Machine Facebook page, I posted this thing I came across, a Happy Days quiz, and I'll be posting more of these because I guess they got it for different shows and stuff. But there's a site, it's www.funtrivia.com, got all kinds of little fun quizzes and stuff for people to check out in trivia. And just to kind of end the show on this, I have a couple more of these trivia questions. See if you know any of these. Who played Who played Danny, the boy Fonzie adopted in the final episode of Happy Days? Any clue?
Oh God, I have no idea.
Okay, this is gonna shock the hell out of you. Danny Ponce, who would go on to play Willie Hogan on the Hogan Family.
Oh, okay.
And then okay. And then what is the nickname of the Happy Days character Warren?
I don't know.
It's so simple. You're gonna laugh when I tell you. Potsy. You ever notice? You ever notice how everybody calls him Potsy, or even sometimes Ralph or the Fonz will say, "Oh, you're such a Potsy." And you ever notice how Mr. C always calls him Warren, like out of respect? Okay.
Kind of like Miss C getting away with calling Fonzie Arthur, because she was the only one that could get away with calling him by his real name. Yeah.
That is true. And in fact, there was one episode where Fonzie goes back to night school and he graduates. Nobody knows he's doing this, and it's just between him and Mrs. C, and she's supposed to keep it quiet, and she lets it slip, and then he kind of gets mad and he stops speaking to her for a while, and then they end up, of course, by then making up, and he says, you're the only one I allow to get away with talking to me like that. Because he really did look upon her like as a mom type. And and here's another thing. We're going to end on this, that I thought was kind of interesting. The show ran for about 10 years, as we said. But do you have any idea how many Christmas episodes Happy Days had?
Oh gosh, no, I don't.
It's going to shock the hell out of you. Only 5. I mean, just think about that. You would think.
Wow, it's like every show, wound up having. It's like whenever you have any show, they always have a Christmas episode. They always have a Halloween episode.
Yeah. I think my favorite one, though, I got to say, as far as the Christmas episodes, the one where we were talking about where Fonzie has to pretend like he has somewhere to go, and they kind of catch him in a lie, and they invite him to spend Christmas with them, and he's like, "Hey, I know what you guys did. That's cool. Wow, thanks." And
what a great show! You know, I hope people that listen to this, you know, if they're not familiar with Happy Days, you know, maybe it sparks them to watch some of these retro channels that have, because it's good. It's a good. Innocent, non-harmful, just way to pass the time.
Yeah, it really is. What I mean? Yeah, it really is. And Gar, I'd like to thank you once again, taking time to do this. I really do appreciate it. If you could hang on for just a minute, but before we say our final goodbye, I just want to let people know next time we do this that we're going to be talking about another one of our all-time favorite shows, Three's Company, paying tribute to the late, great John Ritter, probably one of my all-time favorites as well, and rightfully so, I think. But thanks for doing this, Gar, and like I said, if you could just hold on, I'd appreciate it.
Well, you know, I just want to say to all your listeners too, you know, stay tuned, because you know, you and I are talking about doing more in the future that are going to be some really big and good ones. I mean, Three's Company's, you know, cool, and and there's just this is not this whole series. I think, you know, this is like a 1-year anniversary for us. Of doing this Gar Borras' Time Machine thing, but the train is not slowing down. The train is gaining momentum, and this the stuff that we got planned in the future is going to be really, you know, some. I can't wait. I can't wait to do it. It sounds like so much fun, you know, to talk about these things, and I don't want to give it away. Because man, it's going to be really good.
Just tune in, and to end on one word, I'll say everything Gar's talking about in a word: iconic. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Bye, Gar. Take care.